Jai Hind.
Okay, Jai Hind, Anusuya.
So, on this day, when the nation is celebrating the Vijay
Yes.
Divas and remembering the heroes of 1971 war, we are here with our very dear Mukesh Khetrapal sir, the younger brother of Lieutenant Arun Khetrapal, and today we will listen to him about the war of Basantar. Uh, Good evening, Mukesh sir, and we welcome you again in our Vartalap. We are really
Ji.
honored that you gave today our today you gave us time, and so we are here to listen from you about the war of Vasantar. We already heard from you on the birthday of Lieutenant Khetarpal about his life, about his childhood, and today
Mhm.
we all are here to listen to you about the war of Vasantar.
Mhm. No, thank you, Anasuya. And today is the 16th of December, and it was on this day that my brother died in battle. It brings back memories for me. It almost seems like yesterday. The battle, as we are all aware, was a consequence of the liberation of Dhaka, East Bengal, and as a consequence, the Pakistani attacked us in the western sector. The war clouds had been looming for a long time, and my brother was fortunate to take part in this battle. He had just got commissioned some 6 months before the battle started. It was his dream to join the prestigious regiment of Poona Horse, a 200-year-old armored corps regiment, highly decorated, perhaps the most highly decorated regiment in the Indian Armed Forces. So let me start the story when Arun first joined the regiment. He was
Sure,
very,
sir.
very happy that he got the opportunity to go and join this particular regiment. And as soon as he joined the regiment, the colonel of the regiment, at that point in time, Colonel Hanut Singh, later on General Hanut Singh, and then Major Ajay Singh, who was the adjutant of the regiment, who later on was a lieutenant general and became the governor of Assam when he retired, were the two key people in that regiment that the whole Indian army looks up to. General Hanut is a legend who was a very upright, spiritually minded army officer who would spend many hours in doing tapasya. And the regiment too had this very strong belief. They had this hand of Allah, which was a baton that they had worn in the Persian War. And that hand of Allah was supposedly the hand of God that protected the regiment in all adverse circumstances. The whole regiment believed in it, and having General Hanut Singh that time as the commanding officer of the regiment, more so. So the day my brother joined the regiment, within a week, they first held a dining in ceremony. And it is a treat to go to the mess of the Poona horse because it is decorated with silverware and trophies collected in the last 200 years from across the various battles that the regiment has fought. And every young officer is taken through the history of each little trophy in what circumstance, where was it won, and how was it secured. Arun too had been through this entire history of the regiment. And there, the latest trophy on the regiment was one of Colonel Tarapur, who was the commanding officer in the 1965 operations when we had again a battle with Pakistan. And Colonel Tarapur was awarded the Paramvir Chakra. He led from the front as a commanding officer. Despite being wounded, he did not evacuate his position. And for his valor, he was awarded the Paramvir Chakra, for which the regiment was very, very proud. As a young officer, uh, there is a tradition in the Poona Horse where they do a dining in ceremony for all the young officers. And the young officer, various toasts are raised to the valor and success of Poona Horse in its various episodes that the regiment has been through. And people are toasted by taking one drink and a second drink and a third drink. And finally, after many several rounds of this thing, because there are many trophies that the regiment had won, the last opportunity is given to the young man to raise a toast as he thinks appropriate. So by the time it became Arun's turn to raise the toast, I'm told he raised his glass and said, I raise a toast in the name of Colonel Tarapur, the first Paramvir Chakra for Poona Horse. And then, of course, the entire regiment clapped for that, and they did a bottoms up in terms of the cheers that they did raised. Everyone clapped on it, and that was the end of the story, people thought. But by now, Arun was, I think, one drink down too many, because he said, no, hold on. There is a second toast that I want to raise. And he raised his glass again, and he said, this is to the second toast that I want to raise to the second Paramvir Chakra winner of Poona Horse, Arun Khetrapal. Now, can you imagine? People were half serious, some laughed. But I think somewhere in Arun's mind, he was very sure that he would be that second person. He was dispatched off to do the young officers course, which is a course which trains the young officers on the how to use the armor. But because war clouds were looming large, the course was stopped in between, and Arun was asked to return to his regiment without completing the course. Now, I'm told that to get onto the train to reach his unit, he actually had to fight with the guard who did not give him permission to board the train, despite Arun saying that he was an army officer and was going to the frontline area. Cut it short, he got into the train and he headed straight to his regiment. Now, by this time, the regiment was about to move to the forward area, and Arun was called by Anuj Singh and told, Arun, since you haven't completed your young officer's course, you will stay in the background and you will support us from the back end. Now, when Arun heard this, it broke his heart. He pleaded with Colonel Hanuj that he be not deprived of this opportunity to go into the forward area along with the regiment and be right at the very forefront of the attack that the regiment was expected to do. Colonel Hanuj looked at Arun and said, Arun, I'd like to do that. I like your Josh, but unfortunately, you're not trained and I cannot permit you to go to that forward area. Arun then went and pleaded with the adjutant And he told Major Ajay, later on General Ajay, that, sir, please talk to Colonel Hanuj Singh because I have to go to the fort area. Major Ajay, as an adjutant, took the opportunity of going to talk to Colonel Hanuj and said, sir, this young man is very insistent that he wants to come with us to the forward area. Would you like, can you consider it? Colonel Anuj said, listen, he's not trained and he can't go. But Arun was persistent. He went back to Colonel Anuj and said, sir, please give me one opportunity. So Colonel Anuj turned around and told Arun, okay, I'll give you an opportunity, but first you got to prove yourself. I will personally certify you. If you get certified, you can join the regiment and come to the forward area. Arun was given 48 hours to prepare himself. He worked day and night. He slept under the tank. He worked with the tank crew. And on that fateful day, few hours before the regiment was departing to the forward area, Colonel Anuj put Arun to the test. And sure enough, Arun had prepared himself well, and Colonel Anuj had no option but to allow Arun to join the regiment because Arun passed that test with flying colors. And Colonel Anuj was obliged to keep his word of mouth. So Arun was made in charge of a troop of tanks, which are 3 tanks. And this troop, Colonel Anuj, however, put one senior non-commissioned officer in a second tank, and he told Arun, although you're in charge of the squadron, but please listen to this senior soldier, an NCO. He's an experienced veteran, and he will guide you. So that was okay. They moved, I'm told, overnight to the forward area from Samba, where they were positioned. And there is a Basantar river, less than 20 kilometers from Samba. The tanks moved at night and they had to cross the river where the Corps of Engineers had laid a temporary bridge structure over the river. Now, all the tanks went across one by one, but as soon as they crossed the overhead bridge, they discovered that the land on the other side of the river had been heavily mined. There were mines which could destroy the tanks, and in the middle of the night, to negotiate that path across the mines was extremely difficult to do. Besides, the enemy had machine gun fire coming from the other side, including some recoilless guns. The engineering team was in the process of cleaning up the minefield, but it was taking too long, and dawn was beginning to happen. The first rays of sunlight were beginning to show. There was an infantry division on the other side which had crossed the bridgehead, and the infantry division had been attacked by Pakistani armor. And there was desperate calls saying that please rush the tanks across because we are under fire from the Pakistani armor. Time was running out. I'm told that Colonel Hanuj took the decision and told the POONA HORSE tanks that tell the engineers to get out of the way and we will drive across, no matter what happens. And if one tank gets knocked out, then the second tank at the back will take the place of the first tank and lead. And he said, God will not forgive us if we don't cross this minefield quickly. So that's as per that decision, the tanks started moving in single line order. And this, fortunately for them, not one single tank was impacted by the minefield. It was the hand of Allah, which was protected that regiment that I told you about. But whilst they were going across, there was heavy fire from machine guns, and the non-commissioned officer who was assigned to Arun to guide him received head injury. He got a hit in the head and he died. So now Arun was, his tank was not incapacitated, but the commander of that tank, the NCO, was no more. So now Arun was the sole in charge of this troop of 3 tanks. When they were crossing the minefield, at that point in time, they received fire from a recoilless gun, which can actually, I'm told, incapacitate the tank. And he found that there was one such tank, a recoilless gun, which was mounted on a jeep, which was creating problems for the tank movement. Arun, I'm told, drove his tank up to the jeep, knocked the jeep across, and captured those Pakistani soldiers that were manning that piece of artillery. Those prisoners of war were sent to the back, and Arun then carried on his onward journey across the minefield, which they had by now crossed. They kept receiving various kinds of wireless information from Brigadier Hoshar Singh, then Major Hoshar Singh, who was also awarded the Paramvir Chakra in that same battle. Arun went across and he was told that Pakistani armor is attacking us, come, rush. So Arun, along with the team of 3 other squadrons, there was Captain Malawat and Captain Malhotra, the 2 other squadron commander of the 3 tanks that they were also leading. So in all, there were 9 tanks, and they were rushing to the forward area. I'm told that Major Malhotra's tank gun had some technical issue and was not in a position to fire. So as a consequence, he fell back, and his tanks, remaining 2 tanks, along with Captain Alawat's tanks and Arun's troop of 3 tanks, they reached the forward area. 8 tanks, because one had been incapacitated for technical reasons. On the way, when they reached there, they started facing the enemy armor. So first, I'm told that a wave of 3 squadrons from a regiment called the Fakhre-Hind. Now, Fakhre-Hind was no other but a part of Poona Horse before the partition. Half the regiment stayed in India and half the regiment went on the other side. So actually, they were one regiment, but which got broken up into 2, and now they were facing each other as enemy to enemy and trying to fight for their own country. The 9 tanks, a fierce tank battle took place, and Captain Alawat's, Arun's tank, and the 2 tank of Captain Malhotra faced the enemy, and I'm told that they decimated the enemy tanks. without any casualty to Arun's troop of tanks. Now, when the Pakistani armor was attacked, I'm told they radioed for help, that we are under heavy fire from the Indian armor. Please rush resources to the spot. So at that point in time, I'm told that close to about 24 tanks, because they had already lost some 8-9 tanks, and 24 tanks were rushed to that spot where this battle was taking place. Heavy exchange of fire happened. I'm told that we knocked out several of their tanks, and Arun too, by this time, had knocked out a few tanks. His 2 other tanks in his squadron were also incapacitated. And one by one, as the battle progressed, more and more out of the 9 tanks from the Indian side, which were confronting close to 24 tanks from the other side, a point occurred when only Arun's tank was left in fighting condition. His tank was in fighting condition, as is in the sense that his tank had been hit, it was on fire. So Captain Malhotra told Colonel Hanuth, the commanding officer, that Arun's tank is on fire, and Colonel Hanuth told Arun, okay, move back, put out the fire. But Arun was in a moment where he realized that if he moved back at that point in time, it would indicate weakness to the Pakistani armor, besides the fact that there was a lot of infantry, Indian infantry on the ground. Gun is still, and he said, I will show these. He again received another order from Colonel Hanuth. Arun, don't be silly. Put off the fire, because it can be hazardous to you, since you've got high octane fuel in the tank and you've got a lot of armament in terms of shells which could burst. Arun decided to put off the intercom, because if he had not put off the intercom, it may have tantamounted to a disobedience in the order from his commanding officer, which even in a battlefield can result in a court martial. So he switched off his intercom and he continued to fight against the enemy. He had been surrounded by 8 tanks, and one by one, Arun and his team of gunner and the driver, actually the driver by now was wounded, but there are 4 people in the tank besides Arun. There was Mr. Nathu Singh and Prayag Singh were the 2 other people who were surviving members of that in that tank and are even alive today. He told Parag Singh, aim, fire, aim, fire. And one by one, they kept knocking out the tanks. But by now, the fire had become a little bit, his tank was on fire, and the fire was creating a problem. So Parag Singh told Arun, sir, thoda sa tank ko piche karke aag bujha lete hain. And Arun said, nahi Parag Singh, आपने सीओ साहब का ऑर्डर नहीं सुना, 1 इंच भी हम पीछे नहीं हटेंगे. By now, there were less than 3 or 4 tanks left, because Arun and his team had knocked off some 4 or 5 tanks. He knocked off that third tank, and then he knocked off the second tank. In the meantime, there was one tank that was advancing, and I'm told that that other tank was less than 100 meters from Arun's tank, and they were face to face. At that point in time, Arun pointed his gun at the enemy tank, and the enemy tank had pointed the gun at Arun's tank, and they both fired. Arun's shell hit the enemy commander's tank. Later on, we discovered it was the commanding officer's tank from Fakhre Hind. So when that tank was hit, then Major Nasser, later on Brigadier Nasser, who my father met many years later, bailed out of the tank and hid under the tank. But before he bailed out, the shell that Major Nasser's tank had fired hit the porthole of, which is on the and it burst inside. Arun was severely wounded. He was the enemy tank had been destroyed, but in the process, Arun too lost his life. I'm told that he asked Parag Singh, Parag Singh, thoda pani pila do. Parag Singh jumped out of the tank, and it was a very cold winter night, as it is today, on 16th of December. He thought he would like to heat some fire and maybe quickly make some hot tea. By the time Parag Singh was able to put that fire together and make the cow tea, and he came back, Arun was no more. So that is the story of the battle as I am told. It has been well documented. I'm told that that battle was very, very essential because at that point in time, if the Pakistani armor had breached that bridgehead and crossed into the Indian territory, then they would have cut off the supplies and cut off the road, because the road from Pathankot to Jammu passes less than 15 kilometers from that bridgehead. And if the Pakistani armor had been able to break that bridgehead, then they would have cut off the supplies to J&K, and the battle may have turned in another, in a dimension that none of us would like to remember. It was a very critical position. I'm told that over the many wars that have been fought, there has never been such an extensive tank battle as occurred on this day, the 16th of December in 1971. The tanks, some 30 odd tanks were destroyed on that one day. No tank was left standing on either side at the end of the battle, but 9 Poona Horse tanks destroyed close to some 30 odd tanks of the Pakistani armor. And I think that perhaps my brother played a critical role in stopping the onslaught of the Pakistani armor, because this battle happened on the 16th. On 17th of December, India declared ceasefire, and there was no further fighting after that. Major of the Pakistani armor, the gentleman Major Nasser, came across on the 17th, and soldier to soldier, he met with some other people from India, from Poona Horse. And the first thing that he inquired was, who was that gentleman in that tank that blunted our attack? Had it not been for him, we would have been in India by now. So that is how Major Nasser came to know
Remembered.
that it was Arun who was leading that tank. Because many years later, Major Nasser tried to reach out to my father, and several years later, there is another story when my father, being a refugee from Sargodha, wanted to visit his hometown, and it so happened that he happened to meet Major and then later on Brigadier Nasser, for which on that day, of course, he told my father that, I was that enemy commander who fired that shell that killed your son. But he says, if I had a son like him, I would have been very proud. And I salute you, sir, for having such a brave son as what Arun demonstrated on that day. So that, Anushya, is the essence of the story.
So when you were describing the battle, actually we can just visualize the, I mean, what we read in Mahabharat, that seven enemies are I mean, encircled the young Abhimanyu, and he was
Mm.
alone fighting to save
Mhm.
on that particular day. So it
Correct.
was just like that, that eight tanks surrounding one second lieutenant of just 21 years, even, I mean, before completing his training and everything. And he was standing alone to save the nation from the enemy.
Mhm. That is right. It was, I think, destiny was calling him, you know,
Absolutely, sir.
and he lived up to, you know, the expectations of India.
And which I feel, sir, he actually showed a way to the generations to come, that what you can do in young age. We talk about, I mean, experience, we talk about many things, but if you have that passion for your service and passion for your nation within you, you can do it.
That is right. That is right. No, I'm sure that, it was a grievous loss to me and my family. We were a very small
Absolutely.
family. Arun was only 1 year older than I was. My father was an army officer himself. In fact, in 1965, he happened to be in that same sector where Arun was there. My father was very much looking forward to seeing his son's career in the armed forces. It was a shattering experience for us and still pains us. That pain is still in my heart.
True.
It, my mother and father carried that pain to their grave. Yes. But in hindsight, as I stand here talking to you today, from this morning, I have seen that, Vijay Divas and Battle of Basantar Day is being celebrated in many locations, including his Samadhi, because in Samba, very close to the place where the battle happened, very on Samba is a place in between Pathankot and Jammu, and a large function gathering is happening there. I went there last year. Another large function has happened in Pathankot. The very third function has happened today in Chandigarh this morning in Chandi Mandir. All of Arun's course gather at Chandi Mandir, where there is an institute called KOI, Khetrapal Officers Institute, and Arun's, yes, that is the this thing. Adrija, that's right. That is the samadhi in Samba that you're showing me. But I'm telling you, in
Yes.
Chandigarh, in Chandi Mandir, all Arun's course mates from NDA, he was from the 38th course in NDA, gather there and they come from different parts of the country, lay a wreath on Arun's statue. I have happened to visited that memorial service every year. This year, I have not been able to make it there. But every year, so when I go there, you know, they have so many stories to tell of their own valor, of about Arun, many things that I didn't know about him. They were at that point in time in NDA between 17 to you know 20 years of age. That was their age, and they remember the various things they did together. And they keep telling me of various stories because Arun was I'm told, the squadron cadet captain of a particular squadron called the Foxtrot Squadron in that in NDA. And some of them were, as they call themselves, foxies. They remember the various, things they did together and how, you know, that squadron, because Arun showed some kind of a spark even then. I'm told that actually Arun, I may have shared this with you earlier, was a perfect gentleman. He was extremely, soft spoken, but a person with very strong will, very strong willpower. And I'm told that in NDA, when he was nominated in his sixth term, because it's a 3 year course there, every term is of 6 months. He was the capped as the squadron cadet captain of that particular squadron, the Foxtrot Squadron. So when he became the squadron cadet captain, then all the people in the squadron said, "Ah, अब तो मजा आएगा because Arun is a very nice guy. अब हम आराम से जिएंगे, because he's a gentleman." But the other side of Arun, which they hadn't seen, was that in that as soon as he took charge of this thing and squad for Foxtrot squadron, actually amongst the, I think, 13, 14 squadrons were there, was positioned somewhere in the bottom end of those in terms of performance on various parameters at the bottom end of the 13, 14. And this was not in Arun, did not agree with Arun. He was quite sure that Foxtrot squadron would emerge as the number one squadron of the NDA in that course. So to make that happen, Arun worked hard and he made everyone work even harder so that they could come up to that expectation. And everyone started cursing. Oh my God, what is this guy doing? हमने तो सोचा था कि हमारे को हम आराम से जिंदगी बैठेंगे, यहाँ पे तो बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ रही. And sure enough, the story is that Squadron was declared as the number one squadron that year. So from that position that he had to where he took that squadron, of course, in hindsight, many of those people are very happy saying that, listen, we were the best squadron. And they also initially tell me that how they cursed Arun, but later on said, oh my God, thank you, Arun, for what you did. So that was Arun's character.
So actually, it is a great loss for the nation itself. Such a leader, such a warrior we lost in that age. It is a loss for the entire nation, entire Indian army.
Rusha, what you're saying is right, but you look at it like this. We will all be dead and gone.
War is only about, actually, no one wins in the war. Absolutely.
But yet, you look at this, what I'm trying to say is that we will all be dead and gone. I'm an old man myself now. Arun was 1 year older to me. But Arun has remained 21 because he was 21 and he will never be 22. What is more, his name I find has been able to inspire so many people. I can't tell you,
True.
how many mails, how many WhatsApp messages, how many phone calls I've received this morning, and many from people who I've never met in my life, and a lot of youngsters. So he is dead. Arun is dead, but I think the legacy that he's left behind has been able to inspire a lot of youngsters,
Absolutely.
and that itself is a payback, you know, for what he was. So, although a personal loss, but at the same time, I feel very humbled, to be his younger brother. I mean, if I go out and I meet anybody from the armed forces and I say I'm Khetrapal, the first question they ask me, are you related to Arun Khetrapal? And that is because the passing out parade in Pune is called, I'm told, the Khetrapal Stadium. And every single officer that passes out from that parade ground knows about Arun. There's the same thing in IMA. The final step, as soon as a young officer is commissioned, that final step, that hall outside that you see is labeled as Khetrapal Hall. So if he's been able to be a source of inspiration to these young officers, it is, I think, Arun is still very much alive. More alive than you and I will be in a few years from now.
Absolutely. So we
So I
again thank you. And actually, uh, since morning, you are giving all your time to many people like us. And already you have talked more than 40 minutes, sir.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so my time is over.
It's now 42 minutes. So I think we
Okay.
should, I mean, give you a rest now.
Okay, thank you, Anushya. And I
Because
must
our
compliment you
conversation
and your
will,
team. Yeah,
thank you,
but
sir.
Anushya, I cannot finish this interview without telling everyone, who's listening in to this conversation that Adrija and Anushya are part of a wonderful team called Desh. They reach out to all the war bereaved families. For so many years now, I get a bouquet of flowers on Arun's birthday, and it is done so selflessly. So, my pranam to you, to your organization, to Desh. Well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.